Hi, this is Alicia Parr. I'm the founder and CEO of Performentor, and this is another Leader to Leader talk. And today it's with Ron Harding, and we're gonna talk a little bit about trust and fear in the role of those emotions in building and growing organizations. Ron, maybe you could share a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I guess I think of myself as a retired global executive. And in my retirement, I've been coaching and mentoring anything from startup companies to what we'll call mid-sized companies.
Yeah, and also, folks may not know your success as quite extensive. You've actually turned around a large division of a chemical company and turned it from losing money and being in the dumps to being highly, highly successful. And by implementing a lot of models and theories about how business works. So, maybe brief note about that.
Yes, I
Yes.
mean, when you get an assignment to take over a business that most people consider impossible to grow, the main problem generally is what we'll call organization and management. So I became somewhat learned on organization and management during those roles as a turnaround specialist for the company. And we took a business that was 175 million in sales for 7 straight years, so couldn't grow. And we tripled the business. And then the company sold that division to a private equity firm. So the main explanation for that growth is just the improvement in the management system of that particular organization.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that lends a lot of credibility to you as well, knowing how and when to implement such a system. So I'm also curious to hear how this realization that the role of trust and fear in organizations, because I know we were talking one time and you said that I think there's two primary energies, in an organization that keeps it together. And I was just curious, kind of like, how did you arrive at that realization?
Yeah, I've often said that there's only two glues that hold organizations together, and those two glues are trust and fear.
Yeah.
So it sort of makes sense when you look at it from a sort of a 30,000-foot level, that fear, of course, can hold an organization together only from the standpoint that everybody's afraid
Mhm.
to, I guess, not do what they're being told, or not cooperate because there's some kind of bad thing on the other end. And then
Mhm.
there's trust. Trust is sort of able to be defined in a multitude of ways, but some companies call it commitment. In other words, they have a vision or a noble purpose that people buy into, and therefore they're committed to that purpose. But then underneath that, the details are important as well, as to whether or not a person is doing it out of fear or out of commitment. And so there's a part of that organization that basically has mutual confidence and reliability. They bank on mutual confidence and reliability in each other, and across employees, across departments, even with customers, and even with the community that they're in. And those are just the high-end companies that perform greatly. Those with fear have no creativity, because
Mhm.
people are afraid to step out on a limb and do things.
Mhm.
Whereas things with trust, those companies are notable for their innovation and creativity and their execution, quite honestly.
Yeah, I hear a lot of folks tend to think of accountability, the idea of accountability as being primarily fear-based. How do you look at that?
Well, funny that you asked me that question. I've been working recently on something that I call the redemptive management system, and
Mhm.
the sense of that system is that if you think of management systems, and I believe trust is only going to be fully spread through the organization by having a management system. In other words, looking at management as a full system rather than just a bunch of people getting together and promising to trust each other. So the full system, redemptive system, is a management system that basically is taking something that probably is not intended for good or bad, is
Oh.
what we'll call generic, and turning it into something for good.
Mhm.
The other end of the spectrum is exploitive management system, where the manager is only looking out for themselves, or the owners are looking out for themselves, and people are being exploited.
Mm.
whether that's a light exploitation or a heavy exploitation that could lead even to corruption on the extremes of that. So in that continuum, I have been thinking about the redemptive management system and what the definition of accountability, and I've concluded that accountability is catching or finding your people when you're doing things right and validating that they're doing things right. In other words, people want feedback. So when you catch your people doing things right, and the reason they're doing things right is because you've been clear about the expectation. And that's where the trust start is they know that they clearly know what's expected. And therefore, they're intending to do what's expected, and therefore it's going to get validated when the manager comes by to validate. And managers should come by and validate and ensure that they were clear. And notice that I said basically that the manager was clear. Many companies, many managers, when the employee is not doing what they expect, blame it on the employee. But 9 times out of 10, it's lack of clarity in the original instructions, the original expectation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, one thing I like to share with folks that get a little caught up in the accountability definition as like, is a bad thing. It's a bad word. It's like, people hate being held accountable. And I say, well, that's because you're thinking about accountability only as exposure to negative consequences. True accountability is exposure to positive and negative. And I guess in a larger organization, then any manager needs to make sure that the positive is also flowing through as well as the negative.
I think that's why the management system is needed. If we look at just performance management in its subsystem of the bigger system, reality is that people need to be told what they're doing well and also what needs to improve. And oftentimes managers get hung up because they think that no one wants to know how to improve. Well, almost everyone wants to know how to improve.
That's
And so
right.
managers have a fear themselves, since we're
Yeah.
talking about that word, that they don't want to upset somebody. But what they really need to do is focus on their job, which is to answer the question for that person, what's my job? And to answer the second question, which is, how am I doing? And if you answer those 2 questions, you're doing your job as a manager to answer those 2 questions. And in the performance management system, that's the case. Now, when you take that system and add to it your career development system that basically takes what I need to improve and gives me helpful ways of doing that, helpful training, helpful instructions on how to improve, I develop trust. I develop confidence in the system that says the system is out to help me. And then we sort of redefine the accountability piece is that they're not here to get me, they're here to help me. And so if we can turn that definition of accountability into real actions inside the company, then we're moving somebody toward what I call the redemptive management system rather than the exploitive management system.
Well, the redemptive management system sounds like it's adheres to my bailiwick, the trust algorithm, and I know that we've talked about, and the purpose of the trust algorithm is to extend beyond just interpersonal ways of building trust, but building a system that enhances trust, which is what you just described. Because you need the accountability, exposure to consequences needs to be aligned with the person's authority to make decisions and make changes to resources, and also, gosh, they better be capable of doing the work. And if you don't have all 3 things lined up, then you're going to have opportunities to break trust, and it'll happen.
That's exactly right. And the trust algorithm is all of those different components of this. And then we ask ourselves the question, how do we create something that can be grasped all at the same time? And the answer is seeing management as a management system.
Right.
Then trying to figure out what does that look like. Now I realize that it's one thing to say we should look at it as a management system, but what are the components of the management system? And put that together and basically be able to operate every day within that system. And one of those components is the thing that we already talked about was performance management, and maybe a side piece to that is career development. Everyone should have a career development plan within the organization. So it's pretty straightforward to start listing those out. You always wonder, do you have all of the systems listed out, and are you doing them the correct way to build trust?
Yeah, it's interesting that that some folks might say, well, people aren't looking for feedback from me. They aren't looking for growth. I just want them to do my job, their job. But, I am hearing more and more, obviously I work in human resources, and over the past 10, 15, 20 years, the current younger generations really, really have an expectation of having a career path. And maybe folks of my generation and your generation, the expectation is look, the path will be there if you just work hard and you're loyal. And these days, folks are in a workplace saying, I'm really not interested in even working for you if you can't demonstrate that there's a career path for me. But I mean, have you come across that at all in some of your mentorship?
Well, mentoring startup companies, especially as we get to the point of putting in the management system, people begin to hire their first managers
Yeah.
and those types of things. And of course, there's employees there. Yes, today's world, they want to see the full path. They want to realize that the company is got a noble purpose,
Hmm.
and then they want to know how they fit into that noble purpose. And so those two things fit together in order to be attractive, if you will, for young employees. If you want to attract and retain young employees, you're going to make sure that they're a big part of what the company does. What the company does should be to develop employees.
Hmm. Yeah, when you look at what are the different ways of unleashing and harnessing people energy and organization for growth, having a compelling and energizing purpose that gets communicated and shared is certainly one of those. And like you said, got to have somebody in the right seats where their inherent genius is unleashed, and then and also give them a bit of a development path and some structures, like you said, trust-inducing structures, which it's funny how sometimes people think about hierarchy and structure and feel like maybe it's going to take away their freedom, but very often it unleashes it. Is that what you've seen?
I think when you have hierarchy and structure that is undefined, and different people treated according to their own personality, it it is difficult. It is fear inducing. But when hierarchy and structure is put together that is well defined, and people act according to the confines of the right behaviors, then it's trust inducing. It's also a way of executing at the highest level. It's also a way of attracting employees and retaining employees because they come to work. We've installed basically the redemptive management system in a company, basically in the Middle East, I will say, and that company we set out to be best place to work type environment. And when I've interviewed them, the employees say, when I get on the train to go to work, a smile breaks out on my face.
Aw.
And I thought that was very telling as to whether or not we were being successful in creating the redemptive management system, a system that basically makes them excited to come to work and excited to be there.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lovely measure of how many times does somebody say I have a smile on my face come into work, even on Mondays.
Yes.
So let's, as we wrap up, our brief topic that could be talked about for hours and hours. I guess how would you summarize the distinction between redemptive and I think, would you say punitive or something like that?
Exploitive.
Exploitive management systems, and the role of trust and fear in that, in sort of like maybe a pithy takeaway, if you could.
Well, I think the key, as you pointed out, what is the definition of accountability. Now, you realize that definition only impacts our behavior if we internalize it
Mm,
as managers. So
right.
the issue with trust and fear is really a subject that managers need to deal with.
Mhm.
And I like to say that my job is to build trust. And you might think of it as a mountain of coins. You can have a mountain of coins, and if your mountain is coins that have trust, the trust coins,
Mhm.
whenever you do something basically that induces fear, it takes away a coin. And so you need to build up a fairly high stack of coins in order to maintain trust in your organization. So it's about recognizing that some things, we have inherent fears. if you give me a big project, my fear is that I might not get it done in time, or I might not be able to do it. That's an inherent fear. And we need to have trust built up so that when we have those situations where we're doing a big project and just our own inherent fears, that we have a lot of enough stock in the trust that fear is not going to build on itself. And so I think the only way to really do trust in an effective way is to treat management as a system and make sure that all the components are trustworthy in that system.
That makes a ton of sense, and it's a bit of a provocative and new way to think about things, because we don't often think about the solution with soft woo-woo words as a hard-edged thing like a system. Thank you, Ron, for sharing some of your insights that can help us as leaders really grow our teams, ourselves, and each team member as much as possible. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Alicia.